Welcome back. In today's video, we are going to understand the Kubernetes YAML file. How to write a Kubernetes YAML file. If you have seen the Kubernetes YAML file, there are n number of parameters defined there. So, in this video, we are going to understand each and every parameter in detail. We are also going to use some of the examples so that you can understand each parameter and what you need to write in each parameter while creating your YAML file. So I already have one of the YAML file with me. And here if you see the content of this YAML file, this is a simple deployment file where it is going to create a Nginx container. The scope of this video is to learn what all these parameters, not how we can create a deployment or how we can create a container out of it. So we are going to cover each of these parameters in detail. We are going to understand what we can mention it. Now, if you look at this YAML file, we have the 4 top level fields: API version, kind, metadata, and spec. So these are the top level fields. In most of the Kubernetes YAML file, whatever you are going to write, either it could be related to network, it could be stateless application, it could be related to the service, then you will get these only 4 top level fields: API version, kind, metadata, specification. Now let's understand the API version first. Now here if you see, my kind is deployment. So this is a deployment file. And for this API version which I am using, that is the app v1. The API version field specify the version of the Kubernetes API that the resource adhere to. So here my resource is deployment. It ensures compatibility between the YAML file and the Kubernetes cluster. For example, API version app v1, most of the time it is used for the deployment, and when it is only v1, it is used to create core objects like the networking. Okay. The next one we have the kind. Now in the kind, we can have the pod, we can have the deployment, we can have the stateful set, we can have the job, we can have the ingress, we can have the networking, and there are many more. So these are the most common one which we are going to mention it in the kind. So whatever the file I'm writing, let's suppose I'm writing it for the deployment, then I need to mention that thing in the kind. If I'm writing a networking, then I need to mention it in the kind. If I'm creating a job, then I need to mention it in the kind. If I'm creating a daemon set, I need to mention it in the kind. The next one which we have, that is the metadata. Now here we have the name, label, and annotation. Let's understand these things. So name here is the name of the deployment. So whatever the name I'm going to provide, it is the name of my deployment, because here in the kind I'm using the deployment. So let's suppose here in the kind I'm using the job. So whatever the name I'm going to mention it in the metadata, that is the name of my job. Again, if I'm creating a service, then this name is for that service. So this metadata name is for the name of the kind. Once this is deployed, the name of my deployment here is Nginx deployment. The next one which we have, that is the label. That is a key value pair. So here we have the key app and the value is Nginx. This is to categorize the resource. So here we are using the deployment. To categorize the deployment, we are using the label, that is key is app and value is Nginx. There is one more field, that is the annotation. You can think of the annotation like a sticky note. You can mention the information. So let's suppose you want to mention some information, some important information related to this deployment. So that is something you can mention it in the annotation. The next one which we have, that is the specification or the spec file. In the spec file, we have the replica, we have the selector, and we have the template. So most of the time, you will see these 3 fields only in the specification: replica, selector, or the template. Either it could be a deployment, it could be a job, it could be a daemon set. These informations you will get in the specification. Now replica. How many containers you want to run at a particular time? That is something you can mention it in the replica. Or rather I would say here this specify that 3 identical pods should be running all the time. Next one we have the selector. Now this one is very important because this field is used to identify which pod belongs to which deployment. And here if you see, we have the matching label, that is the app nginx. And in the deployment, if you see here in the metadata, we have the label app nginx. So that means this deployment name is this and this is the label. And here we are giving the selector in the specification where we are telling this replica is for this deployment. So this is very important. If we are not going to mention this thing, it is not going to attach to this deployment. The next one which we have, that is the template. Inside the template, we have the metadata, we have the specification, and this specification is related to the container. And metadata, again, whatever the metadata we have it on the top, the same metadata we have it here. But this is related to the container information. So here we are giving the app nginx. So that means this is a part of this deployment. And in the specification, we are mentioning the container information. Now in the container, we have the fields like where we have the name. Now this is the name of the container. Whatever the name you want to give, you can provide it here. This is the image, nginx latest. Now whatever the image you need to mention, you are going to mention it here. This image by default comes from the Docker Hub. Then we have the port, and here we have the container port, that is port number 80. We can have other parameters as well, but these are the most common parameter which we are using it in the Kubernetes YAML file. So again, we have 4 top level, that is the API version, kind, metadata, specification. In the specification, we have the replica, selector, template. And inside the template, we have the specification where we can pass the container information. And in the container information, we have the name, image, port, all those information. In the specification, we can mention the replica. We can mention the selector. So I hope you are able to understand how to write the Kubernetes YAML file. If you understand these parameters, then writing a Kubernetes YAML file, it's not at all a tough thing. It is very easy because all of these parameters are defined by the Kubernetes. You just need to understand if you are using the kind as a job, then you need to look what API version you need to give. So something like, let me give you one example. If I go here and if I'm going to write Kubernetes YAML file job, so let me open this one. See, here we have the API version, batch v1, kind is job, then we have the metadata, then we have the spec where we have the template, specification where we have the container, where we have the name, image, command, restart policy. So if you see, the format is always the same. It's just that you need to understand what you need to mention where. Okay, let me show you one more. This time I'm going to show you for daemon set. Let me scroll up. Again, we have the API version, kind. See, in the kind, we have the daemon set, then we have the metadata, then we have the specification. So these 4 are related to the top level fields. And in the specification, again, we have the selector, template, and the spec where we have the container information. Along with the container, we have the other informations as well. That is okay. But if you see, the format is always the same. There is no difference between the format. Even if you want to see for service, you can look at for the service as well. Let me scroll up. See, we have the API version, kind, metadata, spec. And inside the spec, we have the container information. Or as this is a service, so we have the TCP information here. We have the selector. Again, we have the metadata. So it's it's the same. Here the API version is v1. Earlier when we look at the jobs, here we have the batch v1. So that is something you need to check while writing your Kubernetes YAML file. But most of the time, the format is always going to be the same. So I hope you understand how to write the Kubernetes YAML file, what are the default fields, what are the top level fields. If you still have any question or doubts, you can mention it in the comment section. If you like this video, do subscribe my channel, like this video. Thank you.